For those of you that don't know, I grew up in the 90s. I grew up in what's called the purity culture movement. So for anyone who's not in their 30s or 40s, let me explain to you what purity culture really is and why it had such an impact on a generation of young people growing up in the church. You see, purity culture hit the scene in the 90s, and it was the evangelical Christian push to try to curb unwanted teen pregnancies, STIs, and of course, uphold a Christian worldview and a biblical sexual ethic. Now, this happened in all sorts of ways. In churches and in schools, conferences, and youth groups all across North America, kids were making True Love Waits purity pledges, where preteens and teenagers were signing documents making a commitment to wait until marriage to have sex. And purity rings were all the rage. Once you made a purity pledge, you would put on a purity ring, much like a wedding ring, symbolizing this new commitment. And popular books like I Kiss Dating Goodbye and Every Man's Battle became bestsellers. So if you grew up in the evangelical church in the 90s, like I did, purity culture had taken the world by storm. And the message was clear: wait until marriage to have sex. It's as if in the 1980s, the main messaging to teens was just say no to drugs. In the 1990s, in Christian circles at least, the main message to teens was just say no to sex. Purity culture, with its strong emphasis on abstinence, it had a 15, 20-year run from the early 90s all the way into the mid-2000s. But fast forward to today, and we're seeing less and less of this kind of thing being communicated so strongly to young people. In fact, there's actually been a major push back on this purity culture movement. There's many conversations right now around if this purity culture movement effect was even effective. So people are wondering, perhaps, did the purity culture movement actually create more harm than help? See, because according to the critics of the purity culture movement, the argument goes like this. With such a strong emphasis on abstinence, there was very little focus on healthy sex education, on things like consent and contraceptives, at least in Christian circles, which may have led to sexual misconduct, sexual abuse, and unwanted pregnancies. And that's why, if you're following along in your outlines, the more powerful something is, the more respect it needs to be shown. The more powerful something is, the more respect it needs to be shown. And that's why we don't let children into gorilla cages. And that's why we set up regulations around weapons. And that's why there's strict enforcement around campfires in the dry summer months. See, the more powerful something is, the more care that is needed when handling. We intuitively know this to be true, and God knows this to be true as well, because sex is His idea. God designed sex. He thought it up, and He knows how best for us to handle it. So we turn to our Bibles, where God reveals Himself and reveals His plans for humanity. And we find and we discover some basic guidelines on how God wants us to best use and interact with sex. Hebrews 13 says, honor marriage and guard the sacredness of sexual intimacy between wife and husband. God draws a firm line against casual and illicit sex. In the NIV translation, it says, marriage should be honored by all and the marriage bed kept pure, for God will judge the adulterer and the sexually immoral. So, this is what we call a biblical sexual ethic. A biblical sexual ethic. God designed sex to only be used in a biblical marriage relationship. And a biblical marriage is one between a man and a woman for as long as they both shall live. A biblical sexual ethic. I came across a local Vancouver newspaper poll a number of years ago, and it highlighted this reality in black and white about how culture's definition of sex versus a biblical sexual ethic is. And I've never been able to forget it. The newspaper asked its readers, can you have sex with no emotional connection? 70% of the females said yes, and 85% of the males said yes. So to most of these poll participants, sex is just physical. It's just recreational play, no emotional connection. But the Bible, it teaches something very different. According to the Bible, sex is powerful, it is purposeful, and it was designed not to be just physical, but emotional and intimate and even spiritual. Listen to how biblical scholar Eugene Peterson paraphrases 1 Corinthians chapter 6. He writes, there's more to sex than mere skin on skin. Sex is as much spiritual mystery as physical fact. See, culture is telling us that we can have sex with no emotional connection. But the Bible has been telling us for thousands of years that sex isn't just physical. It isn't just recreational play, and it's more than just skin deep. He goes on to say, we must not pursue the kind of sex that avoids commitment and intimacy, leaving us more lonely than ever. You see, following a biblical sexual ethic, it won't bring you fame and fortune. Following a biblical sexual ethic, it won't erase your problems. Following a biblical sexual ethic, it won't even get you into heaven. But the truth is, following a biblical sexual ethic, it will bring you closer to God's design for your life. Following a biblical sexual ethic will cause you less strife and less pain in this life. And following a biblical sexual ethic, it will give you greater satisfaction and greater security in your relationships. And who doesn't want that? I love it when science and research, it catches up with the Bible. Like the Bible has been saying this for thousands of years, and now finally science has confirmed what the Bible has been saying all along. John Mark Comer, he points this out in his book, Loveology. He writes, study after study now show that people with the best sex lives are monogamous, heterosexual, married couples who have had few or no partners before marriage. And the reciprocal is true. The people who report the lowest levels of sexual satisfaction are promiscuous singles with frequent sexual encounters. Now, let me just quickly pause, and I just want to speak directly to all the married people watching this, to all the married couples. Since we are talking about sex already, specifically in the context of monogamous, heterosexual, married relationships, trust me, questions came in about married couples and sex as well. So, married couples, listen up. God has designed your marriage relationship with sex in mind. Sex should be a regular part of your life and schedule. See, your partner has made a commitment to only you. They have promised their fidelity and their faithfulness to only you. And they're counting on only you to fulfill this need in their life. So, if you're married and you're physically and mentally able, sex should be a regular part of your life. Now, perhaps you struggle with this. I want you to know you're in good company. This is not a new issue. People have been dealing with this for thousands of years. The Apostle Paul, in that same ancient letter to the church in Corinth, lays out some general advice for married couples. Listen to what he says. He says, now, getting to the question you asked me in your letter to me, first, is it a good thing to have sexual relations? Certainly, but only within a certain context. It's good for a man to have a wife and for a woman to have a husband. Sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life in a world of sexual disorder. The marriage bed must be a place of mutuality, the husband seeking to satisfy his wife and the wife seeking to satisfy her husband. So married couples, prioritize it, plan for it, and communicate about it. Prioritize it, plan for it, and communicate about it. Each generation of Christ followers before us, they did what they could to uphold a biblical sexual ethic in their culture, in their time, the best way they knew how. All I'm asking today is simply, in our culture right now, knowing what we know, what should our approach be? How do we uphold and teach a biblical sexual ethic and at the same time hold on to grace? How do we hold high our Christian moral standards in one hand and yet not beat people over the head with guilt and shame with the other hand? How do we encourage people to respect God's design for human sexuality and at the same time love them when they refuse to listen? And not only refuse to listen, how do we love them when they mock us? When they mock our beliefs? How do we love them when they disrespect God and His design? How do we love them when they flaunt their sexuality loud and proud in our face? What then? What should our approach be? Like I mentioned earlier, these are complex questions, and there's no easy cookie-cutter solutions. But may I suggest that we approach this sensitive and important and at times divisive topic with the same humility and wisdom of Jesus. Jesus, he stood up boldly for the truth about who God was and how God designed the world to best function. And Jesus, he was gracious with the outsiders that didn't always get it right. And Jesus, he was patient with the insiders that didn't always get this right.